Hey guys, welcome back to Total Tactics FPL. It's Fran here, and I'm back with my Game Week 8 wildcard draft. The reason why I've gone for a wildcard is very simple. I have 3 Brighton players, I have 3 Liverpool players, I also have Ward, unfortunately, who plays ahead of Sanchez, and then I've also got situations such as triple Arsenal at an optimal time, I think, to move away from them since the Everton fixture was missed, and I'm quite comfortable going forwards with maybe 1 or 2 Arsenal assets. Starting with the defenders, I have Pope. Pope is, for me, the best keeper in the game. He's someone who I think fits the test of getting a lot of shots, getting extra save points and bonus points, which we've already seen in 2 instances this season. And it's not the sort of fluky sort of games where you see Dean Henderson saving a penalty, because that really just relies on penalties, which is a very small occurrence. Pope, he suffers a lot of shots on targets, but not exactly high quality shots. So you'll actually see that Newcastle's expected goals conceded is relatively low compared to some of the other keepers in the game, particularly around that 4.0 to 4.7 range, including Sanchez. And that makes him a very, very interesting prospect because he gives you the 2 ways of effectively giving you points in FPL, which is clean sheets, hopefully, and then also a lot of save points and even bonus, which he's tapped into twice already this season. When we move into the other assets, James and Fofana are the 2 players who have a blank this week. The reason why I've moved into James and Fofana is because I really want to, I think, adapt into a 3-4-3 formation. I think going forwards, maybe Fofana might not be necessarily nailed for this Chelsea team, but I really struggle to see how he wouldn't be, even if Potter was to just reassess the team and have a look at his centre backs. I do think Fofana is one of those centre backs who will play, especially considering the price tag he arrived at the club with. With James, you have hopefully the opportunity to benefit from him in a good run of fixtures playing right wing back, and that for me is the most appealing thing about James at this point in time. He definitely should be on your wildcard drafts, at least to sit out the bench in game week 8. If you think a little bit more into the future, and you maybe even omit the Crystal Palace game, which could be a tough game, I just think Chelsea on paper have the tools to unlock this Reece James pick even further. As far as Cancelo, Trippier, and Emerson, these are the 3 players that will be playing this week, but they'll also be great assets going forwards. If you have a look at West Ham's fixtures, they do have a great fixture run, arguably one of the top 3 fixture runs in the league, heading towards the next wildcard, which is going to be the World Cup. When we talk about Emerson, though, the big risk is going to be Cresswell, and Cresswell is actually back in training, but Emerson did have a great game last time out when he was playing in the Europa League. So that is going to be one thing to think about. I would say with Emerson, for me, he definitely passes the eye test compared to someone like Cresswell. And it does come down to whether or not you actually think Emerson could be rotated. I just still think there's a high chance Emerson might not be playing, and therefore the most logical next move is to go into someone like Soufal. Soufal is someone who is, I would say, arguably more nailed than Emerson, and he doesn't have to deal with the threat of Cresswell coming back. However, you get a sense of West Ham fans. I do think they feel that Cresswell is somewhat past it as a player, and that Emerson can really take some strides going forwards, and he's already shown it on the attacking end in recent games. Trippier and Cancelo, of course, these are the 2 players that I think are the most interesting picks, because with Cancelo, I feel like we're all going to go triple City. They have better fixture runs than both Liverpool and Arsenal, and when we think about the teams that we all tripled up into at the start of the game in game week 1, City is the team that still remains looking incredible, and I think you also give them the best shot of being able to consistently do well even amidst some tough fixtures. So while City do play Liverpool and Arsenal in the near future, I just like Cancelo in this right back role. I like the Walker injury and what that means for him. I also just like how permanent he is for the City team in terms of getting clean sheets. If you look at the defenders, now that there's so much depth in the centre-back positions, it's actually quite hard to consistently pick out the right defender. And Cancelo is someone who at least we know is guaranteed to get 60 to 65 minutes a game, worst case. So that's why he stays. Trippier is one asset who definitely shines a bright light in this team. I think Trippier is the ideal replacement for Trent, and you can see a lot of managers have already moved that direction, even irrespective of whether they've moved into a wild card or not. Trippier is someone who, first of all, does extremely well in open play and is a great set piece taker. So with great fixtures as well, one of the most interesting fixture runs for his sort of price point. And when you look at Perisic, who's probably the biggest comparison here at that sort of price range at 5.6, 5.x, I would say Trippier is still a little more interesting because he's nailed. Whereas with Perisic, there is a huge threat that Ryan Sessegnon does play a lot of the games, even, for example, the Leicester game, depending on whether Perisic actually plays for Sporting. Moving into the midfielders, we have someone like Andreas who joins the team. He has to stay because he's pretty much the best 4.5 option. Nailed and doesn't have the issues that Bailey has where he could be potentially rotated. With Foden, Bowen, Martinelli, and St. Maximin, these are all players that joined the team as well. And the reason why I've gone into Foden is because I did want to still live up to Triple City. A lot of people will be thinking about going for De Bruyne when we're looking at the midfield options, and I can completely understand why people want to do that. De Bruyne has fired really well this season. He's looked incredibly fit. He has been rested in the Aston Villa game. That's my main concern, and that's exactly why I've gone into Foden. Because for me, the question is still whether or not you want to go into a 3-mium, which means you're probably going to go into a lot of 4.4, 4.0 defenders, and maybe make some budget cuts in the midfield. Or you can just simply go for a 2-mium, which is either a choice between Kane, Son, or De Bruyne. And for me, I think the real answer is going to be Kane or De Bruyne on a wild card. For Son, I feel like it's almost like a 1-game-week punt, and then you're moving straight into De Bruyne. Then De Bruyne already has tough fixtures. Whereas if you're going for Kane, I feel like because he's shown much more consistent form, and even if you look at the underlying data, it's not simply that Son has been unlucky. It just seems to be the case that this team is building consistently more chances for Kane, irrespective of the penalties, and Kane already has penalties on top of Son and is extremely well priced. So for me, the comparison is Kane versus De Bruyne, and I just think Kane is the better option in the midfield, especially since we can get so much out of Phil Foden. Foden has looked exceptional in the last few games. I really liked his performance versus Sevilla. Maybe we'll see if things change our minds in the Dortmund game, but I do think Foden is definitely one of the best assets going forwards. And then we are taking a risk with Bowen. Bowen is probably going to be one of the assets that people are thinking about alongside other picks like Maddison and even Wilfried Zaha. But for me, what's concerning about going for all these options is Zaha is probably the most, I would say, informed player. Not necessarily with the best fixtures, but Zaha is definitely one to think about in Game Week 10. For now, that means you should have a placeholder for either Bowen or Maddison. I know a lot of drafts will move into both Bowen and Maddison, but I can't really back two players that have both shown zero form, and also teams that they've played for which have struggled to get results. For me, West Ham have recently shown a little bit more, but Leicester remains still as one of the worst teams in the league, and I'm not really inspired by Maddison's performances. At least with Bowen, we have a small guarantee of him being potentially on penalties, and that's why I prefer Bowen being the gamble that I like to go with for the short term. Martinelli is someone who stays in my team. I just think he's provided so much value. His underlying stats are better than Saka. A lot of people will also maybe go into Saka because they'll be losing Jesus on their teams. But I still don't think that it's necessary to really hold double Arsenal during this period, which is why I've gone for Martinelli by himself. St. Maximin is going to be my arguably 1-week punt. This team does have 1.4 million in the bank, and St. Maximin just has a perfect fixture on paper with Bournemouth. And if I'm not impressed by St. Maximin, I do think he's an early transfer out to Zaha anyways. But there is a great kind of window where you can go for St. Maximin game weeks 8 to 10 and then move him on later on. Last but not least, it's the forwards. I think this is the most self-explanatory aspect of the draft. A lot of people would be thinking about Tony. What about Isaac, which is covered by triple Newcastle already, and St. Maximin in my opinion. I just feel like St. Maximin and Kane is a better combination as long as St. Maximin is fit over Isaac and Kevin De Bruyne. The reason why is De Bruyne's actually rotatable in some games, especially during fixture congested periods. And on top of that, you already have Wilson coming back, which could heavily impact Isaac's minutes and also his positioning on the field. I do think Newcastle will play a double striker formation when Isaac and Wilson come and join the team, but Wilson is probably even arguably the better asset than Isaac. So that's sort of the situation I feel this draft finds itself in. For the sake of permanency and for the sake of trying to get as many players as possible without dealing with rotation risks, with the exception to maybe Emerson, I think Kane and St. Maximin are the better options. And then Haaland and Mitrovic are non-negotiables. I think they're the two players that should be nailed immediately on any wildcard draft. And I feel like that's the sort of position that Haaland and Mitrovic both occupy in FPL currently because they're two of the best assets in the game. And that's going to be the team. Moving on to our actual Game Week 8 team selection, I've elected to move Andreas into the bench. Yes, it's a Nottingham Forest game. Potentially, I might rotate him with Martinelli in the future, but I just really like the prospects of this 3-4-3 setup with Emerson playing versus Everton. Hopefully, he can get a clean sheet there. Hopefully, Bowen will also find his way onto the score sheet. It's also a great fixture to go Bowen as opposed to Maddison because Maddison has Tottenham, and it doesn't feel like it's the right time to go into Maddison, especially since we haven't seen much of Leicester even when they've been playing versus worse teams. We didn't even get the eye test versus Aston Villa last week, so I just feel like there are slightly more intangibles with West Ham and them having a decent performance despite having a tough game versus Steaua in the Europa League. So Foden is the player here that does replace Kevin De Bruyne effectively for me. I just hope he gets the minutes and doesn't have any 45-minute substitutions. But I do think Pep has been very, very prideful of Foden in his recent press conferences, and I think he has seen that Foden has almost overcome some of his early mistakes in the season and has found his way into the starting lineup on a permanent basis. So I do think Foden stays in this team. And then I'm very happy to go with Newcastle double defense. Potentially happy to move out of triple Newcastle very soon. But then Haaland, Kane, and Mitrovic, very, very simple and easy choices to make, given that I haven't elected to go for De Bruyne. As far as the actual captaincy, I think that the captaincy is either between Kane or Haaland. My vice is probably going to be on Haaland, actually. The Wolves game is going to be a tough game. Wolves are still quite a defensive team. I feel like a lot of people underestimated what Wolves would be like at the start of the season. I think a lot of people thought that they would drastically change their style of football, try to be as offensive as possible in contrast to last season, but I really can't see that being the case. Ultimately, as a manager, your job is to find ways to win as much as possible, and they still look like a very defensive team. Haaland, of course, is a different beast, but I do just like the Kane fixture that much more versus Leicester. So for now, especially since Kane is basically a 1 goal per game player versus Leicester, I just feel like the captaincy is a lot safer, given that he hopefully gets to face Danny Ward this week, and the Spurs team, despite not being, I think, in the most offensive of moods lately, still does benefit and still provides a lot of chances for Kane. So I really feel like this is the best fixture to go for a Kane captaincy and potentially sidestep the Haaland captaincy, which will hopefully not be any more than 170% effective ownership. But we'll see how it goes. And that's going to be my team selection for this week. So thank you guys so much for watching this video.